Thanks for doing this interview. This is such an honor for you to speak to our viewers of the Flute View and to talk to this next generation of flutists, because you've really paved the way for any kind of flutist, not just classical flutists, and you're kind of flute royalty. And I guess the first question is about your flute training. How did you start the flute? What were your influences? How did you pick up the flute?
Well, thank you for your kind words, but far from being a flute royalty, I'm actually a flute mongrel, because I don't have any credible background in any form of music whatsoever. I mean, I see you sitting there behind you as a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls on a music stand, because that's all it is to me. I don't read such hieroglyphic weirdness. I play by ear. I play by memory.
Wow.
And I would never be a classical musician because I don't read music, and to memorize the kind of scores and learn to play accurately what somebody else has written, that's beyond my ability, and kind of beyond my interest as well, because as a music writer you tend to be working in your own little world, doing what you want to do, playing it the way you want to play it, and not having to recognize other people's guidance, criticism, commentary, or recognize any help that they might offer, because I'm quite sure I'd be a much better flute player if I'd taken a couple of lessons when I first started. But I picked up the flute at the age of 20 with not the faintest idea where to put my fingers or how to join the bits together. But Mr. Bowen did a really good job when he designed the flute as we know it, by making it ergonomically a natural instrument to put in the hands. And if you can get a sound from the top of a half-filled beer bottle, you can be a flute player. It's just then a question of making the fingers dance around a bit and fooling most of the people, at least some of the time. But I'm self-taught, and I will never grow beyond the level that I have. Although I do pay increasingly, as I get older, I pay more attention to not playing scales, but practicing throughout the range of the instrument. Playing examples of music or improvisation, which force me to try to use tone colors and the full scale of the instrument, which in rock music is not always easy to do, because you're competing with so many other instruments fighting in the same range of frequencies. But I do practice quite regularly these days. I mean, during the last 10 years, I probably played flute more often than I did for the 30 years previously, just because I enjoy playing it for fun. But it also is increasingly necessary as you get older to stay at your best. Actually, James Galway told me that a few years ago when we were chatting about it, and I asked him, did he actually practice before a concert tour? Did he have to reacquaint himself with some repertoire and get it up to scratch? And he said that every day he plays. If he lets a day go by, then he's going to pay for it later on. I think that's quite true. And the older you get, the more you really do have to work at diligently maintaining your performance level, because if you get complacent, as any musician or any football player or Formula One race driver, if you get complacent and think you kind of don't have to work as hard as you used to do, then you're completely wrong. Chances are the older you get, the more you have to work in order to maintain that physical connection with your instrument. And sooner or later, the mental connection is going to go as well, because you are going to become forgetful or a little foggy or a little slow in terms of improvisation and recognition of what other musicians around you are playing. So it's pretty important to keep up your level of performance, especially as you get older.
And especially since you're on tour with your new album, Homo Eroticus, which I listened to all weekend. I love it. There's so much flute on it, and it's awesome, and it's still so relevant to have the flute as this, main instrument in a progressive rock album in 2014. And So explain a little about how you made this album and what the concept was, and you're currently touring.
Well, writing the album began on January the 1st, 2013, 9 a.m. I took myself into my writing room with deliberately no preconceived ideas or thoughts about what I was going to do, just that I was going to begin work on a new project. And I take my my little acoustic guitar, my flute, and a laptop computer, and I just noodle around. I don't wait for the muse to come and visit. I go out searching for her, and if around midday, if I haven't found her, I'm in big trouble. But somehow we do cross paths usually before lunchtime, and then at the end of a working day, hopefully I've got 2 or 3 minutes worth of music underway. And in the case of this album, I probably had the introductory piece of flute music, the harmonic relationship of that to guitar chords, that was sorted, and then I probably had the first little bit of the vocal verse. And I think I knew that it was going to be called The Doggerland. I don't know why that came to me, but I just always wanted to, find it right at the starting point something that no one else had written about. And I must have been reading about the Doggerland being this low-lying level of ground that connected what is now the British Isles to Western Europe at the end of the last ice age, before the sea levels rose and submerged it, as indeed it did the land bridge, so-called, between what is referred to as Beringia, now the Bering Straits, that connected Asia to the Americas. And at the end of the last ice age, those were raised above the sea level at the time, and our early ancestors were able to pass through to colonize what became the Americas. And same thing happened in Europe, between Europe and the British Isles as they became. So that's kind of a moment. I mean, it's not really a moment. It's probably several hundreds of years during which this took place. But it meant that our early ancestors of Homo sapiens, not there have been previous waves of other pre-human ancestors that have been in the British Isles going back even 750, 800,000 years. But our first Homo sapiens arrivals were not until after the last ice age. And that was a particular time when we were spreading as a species throughout Europe, and indeed throughout the world as we know it now. So I decided I would write an album based on lots of little snapshots through history of elements that talked about migration, not just the migration of people, but the migration of what people create, our ideas, our arts, our entertainment, our engineering, our sciences, our communications, commerce and trade. I just wanted to have lots of little snapshots to talk about us as a very mobile species, even referring, as I do late on in the album, to mankind one day perhaps going amongst the stars. We're a restless species. We're also very opportunistic. And if we think there's somewhere better than where we happen to be living right now, we want to go there and make it our own. And the founding fathers did that in North America, and Buzz and Neil did it on the moon, and the Brits and a whole lot of other people did it in Australia, where we displaced the Australian Aboriginals to the same degree or even greater than indigenous North American Indians were displaced by the early settlers there. But, we're a pretty vicious bunch, we Homo sapiens. But we do leave some good stuff behind us too. And that's what I wanted to try to focus on more on this album, is talking about the upside of our migratory urges.
Well, that's great. I mean, and you came up with that in one day?
Well, the essence of it was on day one, yes. I think on day two I wrote the whole thing down as a series of bullet point paragraphs, which actually appear on the album cover artwork, more or less as I did it on day 2 of the writing process. So yes, I mean, by the second day, I kind of had the whole thing mapped out, and then it becomes a framework, a grid that you can build upon, which is rather energizing. You know, when you've got a plan and you can develop that plan, it's very exciting.
Yeah, I think
but
more.
Of course, it depends on having a good enough plan to work with, and that you've got to recognize if your initial ideas actually aren't that great, it's better to get rid of it straight away rather than spend the next 4 or 5 weeks working on a turkey.
All right. I think more and more flutists are writing their own music and venturing into pop music and composing and just using new techniques. And where do you see the flute today and in the next generation, whether it be in pop music? I'm pop music meaning anything that's not classical or jazz, just something more like rock based. I mean, where do you see the next generation of flute players doing something like Ian Anderson?
Well, I mean, we have to accept that in all forms of music, they're really rather finite. I mean, classical music had pretty much said everything that it could say by the early 20th century. And of course, music for orchestras has been written since and continues to be written, but very often as music, as movie scores and general entertainment rather than memorable symphonic works that take their place alongside Mozart or Beethoven. The chances of doing anything in that kind of context to equal or succeed on that level, I mean, are pretty remote. Jazz, you could argue, pretty much had done everything that it could do under the name of jazz by, I would argue, probably somewhere in the early 80s, by the time so-called jazz rock had run its course. But prior to that, since between the wars in the USA, we saw all the real big developments that brought us towards the evolution of jazz as a recorded medium, as a concert medium being taken seriously as creative, culturally valuable music. That had pretty much been achieved by the time we got into the 60s. And I shouldn't discourage people from wanting to play jazz now, but I think you have to accept that you're working in a finite genre, as you are if you choose to play rock music, because anything that you can conceive of musically that fits into the rock genre, that is of repeating rhythms, simple harmonies, simple developments of melody, usually accompanied by lyrics that are about the human expression, the human condition, and they're usually written in the first person, how I'm feeling. And it's pretty boring because everybody tends to write, in very dreary terms about their emotions, and it's kind of one-dimensional, really. But it's what defines rock music, is songs more or less about being in love or out of it. Rarely does rock music get into any issues that are of social or religious or other significance that might make it a little more weighty or meaningful. It doesn't usually suit rock music to do that. So what I'm getting at is that, it's very hard to find a little bit of territory to call your own these days. Back towards the end of the 60s, it was a very good time to become a musician, because you could plant your flag metaphorically on the moon, or literally in the case of Neil and Buzz. There was territory that you could go and claim that no one had been there before.
Yeah.
And that applied to so much in music. I guess the guiding light for people like me was the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album, which preceded my becoming a professional musician by about a year. And maybe the Pink Floyd's first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. These were beacons shining in the night that said, there is somewhere else we can go. We don't have to just imitate 1950s American rock and roll or soul music. There's somewhere else to go with this, by drawing upon influences from classical music, folk music, other genres of music that perhaps are not part of the pop or rock family. So, this was a good time to be getting into it. You could relatively easily find new ideas and put them to work. I don't think that's so easy today because we've been to the moon. And next time somebody goes, it will be a bit of an anticlimax. It'll be a very expensive anticlimax. And just in the same way as if another flute player decides to go out there and play rock music standing on one leg, it's going to be a bit of an anticlimax because someone's going to say, you know what, you've seen this before. So I'm not sure that we can expect the same revolutionary levels of development that we people like I were fortunate enough to be witnessing and to become part of. But everybody can go out and make their mark. Everybody can go out and polish up the crude diamonds, such as my work. It's a crude diamond. It can be better cut. It can be better polished. It can become part of something far more refined and far more exotic in the right hands. So I guess that's what young musicians today should try to do, to find their way to build upon the often naive successes of people like me in the world of pop, rock, jazz, blues, folk music. They're all rough diamonds. And classical music, of course, is a polished jewel. So those who learn the basics and the expertise and discipline of learning to play classical music are in a good position to try and use that technical excellence to bestow upon other forms of music.
So I have some fan questions. What classical flutists do you like to listen to? Or what music are you currently listening to? Anything that...
The only two classical musicians I know are my buddies James Galway and Andrea Griminelli. I don't know any others. I don't really listen to them very much. I mean, I do listen to some classical music, but not. I suppose being a flute player, I don't tend to gravitate towards work that is for the solo flute. So flute concertos are not part of my listening past, present, or probably future. In the same way as I'm aware of the flute in folk music and aware of great players in flute players in traditional folk music, but I suppose it's because of what I do. I don't tend to want to listen to them. I'd rather listen to somebody playing an instrument that I can't play, rather than listen to other flute players too much. I'm probably, if I'm being as honest as I would like to be, it's because I know that if I'm listening to James Galway or one of dozens of principal flautists and leading orchestras, I know I can never do that. I know that's beyond me. And so I don't need my nose rubbing in that particular notion of failing to come up to that standard. And possibly the same thing would apply if I'm listening to some great player of the Irish flute. I know I'm never going to achieve that level, so I probably don't want to remind myself of that by listening to them. Other than it's good to know what's out there, but I don't spend my time listening to flute players at all, really.
So do you have any new projects coming up after this tour and after this album?
Well, we finished this tour. This tour goes back to America for a few weeks, and then we come home for 4 days, and then we head off to Europe for about 3 weeks of shows in Germany and Switzerland. Then we come back for 5-6 days, and then we head off to New Zealand and Australia, and we get back 2 days before Christmas. So it's pretty busy towards the end of the year.
Yeah.
Broadly speaking, doing this tour, which features elements of Homo eroticus and selection of the best of Jethro Tull. But beyond that, new project, yes, I have a new project that starts at 9 a.m. on January the 1st in 2015, and I have not the faintest idea what it is, but it'd be exciting finding out.
Well, I can't wait.
Call me around 10:30.
Okay, I'll make sure to do that.
And maybe I'll have a glimmer of hope.
Well, I look forward to that, and I'm sure our Flute View viewers do as well.
Well, it's a minority instrument. I'm not someone that spends a lot of time in the company of flute players, but once in a while, for my sins, I do bump into people, particularly younger kids who are learning to play the flute. And the thing that I always try and tell them, not to in any way to dispirit them, but to try and make them aware of the realities, is don't take up the instrument because you think A, you're going to make a ton of money, or B, that you're going to have fame and some glorious future, because the chances are that you're not. The chances are that the best you're ever going to get from playing the instrument, not just the flute, but any musical instrument, is a huge lifelong satisfaction from being a true amateur. Mm-hmm. Remember, the word comes from the Latin root to love. And I always try and remind people that, somewhere around about 180 days of the 365 in any calendar year, you'll find me playing the flute as an amateur musician. In other words, I'm just doing it for fun. No one's paying me. It's the other half of the year that I get paid for, and probably get paid far too much. But the reality is, do it because you love it, not because you think the world owes you a living. And if you're the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra and you've just been out on strike because you wanted more money and better health insurance deals, which I confronted all of this stuff in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago, then the fact remains that you're lucky to have a job at all, let alone to be in an orchestra that gets much higher than average rates.
That's true.
Most orchestras in the world are getting paid not even a full working wage.
Do you have your flute with you?
No.
No flute? Okay.
Well, I actually did have earlier this morning, but yesterday I was playing on a track for a Russian aging rock star, Russia's most famous rock singer from the 70s onwards, and I was playing on one of his songs that he sent to me. So in fact I have my flute sitting here, but right now it's all far away in the other part of the house where I'm rehearsing for the tour, so no, I don't have it to hand. I don't usually keep it in the office because there's a terrible tendency I might actually pick it up and start playing it.
Yeah, I have mine right back here.
Yeah, well, you see, my wife has the desk opposite here, and if I start playing my flute and she starts to do her counts or whatever, she's going to get pretty upset. So I tend not to bring it into the office. But anyway, it's really nice to meet you. I've heard about you, of course, and read about you, and it's good that you're doing all these things apart from your professional interest to also work with the developing youngsters and guide them towards some kind of fruition, hopefully for fun. If you ever get paid for playing the flute, that is an unbelievable luxury which you should be thankful till your dying day for having achieved. But if nothing else, it will bring you a lot of reward and happiness if you don't become embittered, as many people in the world of classical music do, because they do have a tendency to think, well, we've studied for 8 years of our life to get to this level, and we got a job sitting in the second violins of a mediocre orchestra. The world owes me a living. No, it doesn't. You're in the second violins. You're not getting paid. You'd be better off just doing it for fun. Just give up that sort of bitterness. That I find it with so many orchestras that I play with. Half the orchestra are great people. They love to be there. They're really interested to work with me. And I test them. I put them to the test, make them play some stuff they couldn't play yesterday. But the other half are just so negative and down and they just kind of don't want to really be there. They don't really want to be anywhere. They just want the sands to open and swallow them, because they're sort of wretched human beings that just have this bitterness somehow that they're not rich and famous like the musicians that they thought once they could be. But frankly, luck does not visit all of us equally. So even great musicians who end up playing in uninspiring circumstances should try and hold their heads high and enjoy playing for the fun of it, not because they think any of us owe them a living, because we don't. So that's my somewhat downbeat note that I leave people with, but the upside is do it for fun.
Yeah, well said.
That's what I do. Anyway, must move on. Nice to talk to you. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'll put my trousers back on now.
Okay, go for it.